When the grey wolf locked eyes with Tom Brewster through 18 inches of creek ice, something passed between them that had no name in the rancher's vocabulary. Not fear, not aggression. Something older than Montana itself. Recognition. Tom had pulled 147 calves from snowdrifts in his 38 years working cattle on Blacktail Creek. He'd shot coyotes at dawn and buried dogs at dusk. He understood the arithmetic of survival in country where January temperatures drop to 20 below and stay there for weeks. But on that crystalline morning, alone on the fence line with ice cracking under his boots, Tom Brewster discovered that survival has mathematics we don't teach in ranch country. The wolf was drowning in slow motion. Tom saw the animal's hind leg first, twisted in submerged barbed wire that someone, probably him, had lost track of during high water last spring. The wolf's front paws scraped at the ice shelf, claws leaving grooves in the frozen surface, each attempt weaker than the last. Tom stood 15 feet away, breath fogging in the mountain air, and watched a predator die. This was nature. This was January. This was how things worked. Then the wolf turned its head. Tom had looked into wolf eyes before, always through a rifle scope, always with his finger on the trigger. Those eyes had been yellow fire, pure wildness compressed into something that wanted to tear your throat out if given half a chance. These eyes were different, grey-green, the colour of sage after rain, and they held something Tom's mind refused to process. They held a question. His hands moved before his brain gave permission. Wire cutters from his belt, gloves off, ice breaking under his knees as he crawled toward the edge. The water beneath was invisible, black and hungry. Tom's father had drowned in Blacktail Creek during spring runoff in 1973. Tom was 7. He still remembered the color of the water in his nightmares. "You're going to bite me," Tom said aloud to the wolf. "I'm going to cut you loose, and you're going to take my hand off." The wolf's ears flicked forward. Its thrashing stopped. Tom broke through the ice shelf with the blunt end of the wire cutters, widening the hole around the wolf's hindquarters. The water was so cold it felt like electricity. His forearm went numb instantly. He found the wire by touch, 3 strands wrapped around the wolf's right rear leg, cutting deep. The animal's muscles spasmed under his fingers. "Don't!" Tom whispered. "Don't move!" He cut the first strand. The wolf's body jerked. Tom's hand slipped, and his wrist went under. The cold screamed up his arm into his chest. He found the wire again, cut the second strand, the third. The wolf was free. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Tom's arm was underwater to his elbow, his face 6 inches from the wolf's muzzle. He could smell its breath, meat and blood and something wild that made his hindbrain yell at him to run. The wolf could lunge, could grab his face, could pull him into the water where the current would take them both under the ice, and they'd drown together in the dark. The wolf pulled itself onto the ice shelf and crawled away from the hole. Then it stopped, turned, looked at Tom with those sage-colored eyes. And Tom Brewster, who had killed 11 wolves in his lifetime to protect cattle, who had testified before the Montana Fish and Wildlife Commission about predator management, who believed in his bones that wolves were a threat that needed to be controlled. Tom felt his throat close and his eyes burn, because the wolf wasn't showing gratitude. Wolves don't feel gratitude, but it was showing something, some acknowledgement that passed between them like current. His legs buckled, not from cold, from the impossibility of what he was witnessing. The wolf limped into the cottonwoods, favoring its injured leg. At the tree line it paused, looked back once more, then was gone. Tom sat on the ice for 20 minutes with his arm throbbing and his heart hammering. He'd saved a wolf, a grown male, maybe 80 pounds, prime hunting age, an animal that would kill his cattle, that would teach its pack where his herds grazed, that would cost him thousands of dollars over the next few years. He'd saved it. When he stood, his knees shook. He told himself it was the cold, but driving back to the ranch house in his pickup, heater blasting on his frozen arm, Tom couldn't stop seeing those eyes, the way the wolf had looked at him, not like prey looks at predator, not like predator assesses threat, like something else entirely, like the wolf had understood what Tom was doing, like it had made a choice to trust him. Tom's scientific mind, the part shaped by 3 generations of ranching, by veterinary manuals and livestock reports, and predator-prey dynamics, that mind said it was anthropomorphism, projection. The wolf was in shock, hypothermic, operating on survival instinct alone. But another part of Tom, a part he didn't have words for, knew he'd been seen. Really seen. By something wild that shouldn't have been capable of seeing him at all. He pulled into his driveway as the sun hit the mountain peaks, turning them gold. His right arm had no feeling from elbow to fingertips. He'd need to see Doc Morrison about that. But first, he needed to tell Laura. Though he had no idea what he was going to say, how do you explain the moment when a wolf decides not to kill you, when it looks at you like you're both part of something larger than hunger and fear? How do you explain that you'd do it again? Laura was loading the dishwasher when Tom walked in, still wearing his coat, his right arm hanging stiff at his side. She took one look at his face and shut off the water. What happened? Pulled a wolf out of Blacktail Creek. She turned slowly, dish towel in her hands. You...
What? Tom sat down at the kitchen table, the same oak table his grandfather had built in 1942. It was caught in wire, drowning. I cut it loose. You shot it first, right? Before you approached? No. Tom? Laura's voice went flat. You put your hands on a live wolf. Had to go underwater to reach the wire. Creek was frozen over. She dropped the towel, crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, grabbed his arm, the injured one. Tom flinched. Laura pushed up his sleeve. The skin from wrist to elbow was mottled red and white, already showing the deep purple that meant tissue damage. Blacktail Creek, she said quietly. Where your father? I know where. Laura pulled out the chair across from him and sat. They'd been married 26 years. She knew when to push and when to wait. She waited. It looked at me, Tom finally said. The wolf. It stopped fighting when I came close, like it understood I was trying to help. Shock, hypothermia. That's what I told myself. But you don't believe it. Tom met her eyes. I don't know what I believe, but something happened out there, Laura, something I can't explain. She reached across the table, took his good hand. You need to see Doc Morrison. That arm could go septic. Doc Morrison had practiced in Paradise Valley for 38 years. He'd treated everything from bull gorings to rattlesnake bites. When Tom showed him the arm 3 days later, the old doctor let out a low whistle. Water that cold? You had maybe 2 minutes before permanent nerve damage. How long were you in? Tom tried to remember. Breaking ice, finding wire in black water, cutting through 3 strands with numb fingers. 4 minutes? 5? Morrison pressed his fingers along Tom's forearm, checking for sensation. Can you feel this? Barely. Reflexes intact. You got lucky. He made notes in Tom's file. The wolf make it? Don't know. Haven't seen it since. Morrison clicked his pen. Probably dead. Hypothermia, infection from the wire wounds, blood loss. You bought it an hour at most. He looked up. Why'd you do it? Tom had been asking himself the same question for 3 days. Seemed like the right thing. You've shot wolves before. 11 of them, over 30 years. But not this one. No, Tom said. Not this one. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My grandfather told me a story once. Said he pulled a coyote out of a leg trap when he was young, even though his father told him to shoot it. That coyote followed him home, sat outside their cabin for 3 days, then left. My grandfather said it was checking to make sure he was all right. Morrison smiled. Course, that's just a story. Animals don't think like that. Tom's heart dropped. Because he wanted to believe they did, by the end of January, everyone in Paradise Valley had heard Tom Brewster saved a wolf, put his arm in Blacktail
Creek, the same creek that took his father, to cut a predator loose. At the feed store, Jim Mackenzie didn't make eye contact. Heard you went soft on wolves, Tom. Heard you lost 6 calves to coyotes last spring, Jim. Still soft on those? At the Stockmen's Association meeting, the conversation stopped when Tom walked in. Dale Richards finally spoke up. "That wolf's going to teach its pack where your cattle are. You know that, right?" "If it survived," Tom said. Morrison says it probably didn't. "If it did," Dale pressed, "and you lose stock to wolves this year, don't come crying to us about predator compensation." Tom left the meeting early, drove home through darkness, past the fence line where it had happened. He slowed at Blacktail Creek, stopped, got out of the truck. The moon was bright enough to see the creek bed, the cottonwoods, the ice still thick over the water. Tom walked to the spot where he'd broken through. The hole had refrozen, but he could still see where his knees had cracked the ice shelf. He stood there for 10 minutes, looking at the tree line where the wolf had disappeared. His mind refused to believe what his heart knew, that something had changed that morning, that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. When he climbed back in the truck, his arm was throbbing. The doctors said full sensation might never return. A permanent reminder of the day Tom Brewster broke his own rules and saved the thing he'd spent 30 years killing. He drove home. Laura was waiting up. "Can't stop thinking about it," Tom said. "The wolf? Those eyes, the way it looked at me before it left." Laura was quiet. Then she said something that kept Tom awake until dawn. "What if it's thinking the same thing about you?" Spring came late to Paradise Valley. Snow lingered in the high country through April, and Tom spent his days repairing fence line and checking cattle that had survived the brutal winter. He tried not to think about the wolf, tried and failed. May brought green grass and wolf tracks. Tom found them on the eastern pasture first, a clear print in mud near the stock pond where his Angus heifers came to drink. 4 toes, claw marks visible, larger than a coyote's, fresh, maybe 6 hours old. Tom knelt beside it, measuring with his hand. Big male. The track angled toward the tree line but didn't circle back toward the herd. No kills, no harassment, just presence. Laura found the second set of tracks 3 days later near the barn. She called Tom in from the south pasture, her voice tight on the radio. When he arrived, she was standing by the fence, arms crossed. "Look at this." The track circled the barn twice, then headed back toward Blacktail Creek. Tom studied the gait pattern, a slight drag on the right rear paw. His chest tightened. "It's limping," Laura said. "Could be any wolf with an injury." "Tom?" She pointed to where the tracks crossed soft earth. "That's the exact injury pattern you described. Wire damage on the right hind leg." Tom didn't answer. He followed the tracks to the creek, Laura walking beside him. At the water's edge, the tracks stopped. Tom looked across to the far bank and saw them continue. The wolf had crossed at the exact spot where Tom had pulled it from the ice 4 months ago. "It came back," Laura said quietly. "Animals return to familiar territory. It doesn't mean—" "Tom, it's the same wolf." Goosebumps ran down his spine despite the warm May sun. June turned the valley gold with wildflowers, and the wolf became a shadow at the edge of Tom's vision. He'd see it at dawn,
a grey shape in the cottonwoods near the creek. At dusk, a silhouette on the ridge above the north pasture. Always at distance, always watching. Tom didn't tell anyone. The Stockmen's Association was already skeptical of his judgment.
If they knew a wolf was living on his property, not killing cattle but simply existing, they'd say he was encouraging predator behavior, conditioning wildlife to human presence, creating problems for everyone. But the wolf wasn't creating problems. Tom checked his herd twice daily. No kills, no stress behavior in the cattle. The wolf was hunting somewhere else, probably elk in the high country, and only coming near the ranch to… What? Tom didn't have words for it. On a Wednesday morning in mid-June, Tom was fixing a gate hinge when he felt eyes on him. He turned slowly. The wolf stood 50 yards away at the tree line, fully visible in morning light. Grey coat with darker points on the ears and muzzle, 80 pounds, maybe 85, and the right hind leg, scarred, held slightly off-center when standing still. It was the same wolf, no question now. Tom set down his wrench. The wolf's ears came forward. They looked at each other across 50 yards of pasture grass and mountain air. Tom's heart hammered against his ribs. Every rancher instinct screamed at him to go for his rifle. This was a predator. This was danger. This was everything he'd been taught to eliminate, but he didn't move. The wolf sat, shifted its weight off the injured leg, continued watching. "What do you want?" Tom said aloud. The wolf's ears flicked. It stood, turned, and limped back into the trees. Tom told Laura that night over dinner. She set down her fork and stared at him. "It sat down in front of you?" 50 yards away, but yes. Wild wolves don't do that. I know. What are you going to do? Tom pushed food around his plate. Nothing. It's not bothering the cattle. It's just… there. Jim Mackenzie would shoot it on sight. Jim Mackenzie isn't on my land. Something in him shifted that day, some understanding he couldn't articulate but felt in his bones. The wolf had chosen to return, had chosen proximity over the 1,000 other places it could have gone, and Tom had no explanation that made sense to his rancher's mind, his scientific training, his 3 generations of livestock management experience. Laura reached across the table, took his hand. "You know they're going to think you're crazy. They already do. This will make it worse." Tom thought about the wolf, sitting in his pasture, the way it had looked at him, the same sage-colored eyes from the frozen creek. I don't care. But he did care, because what he was witnessing contradicted everything he knew about wolf behavior, and he had no framework for what was happening, no literature to reference, no expert to consult who wouldn't laugh him out of their office. So Tom kept quiet and watched, and the wolf kept watching back. July came in hot and stayed that way. The rain that usually arrived in afternoon thunderstorms never materialized. The grass turned from gold to brown to the color of old bone. Tom checked his weather station every morning. Humidity dropping, temperatures climbing, fire danger escalating from moderate to high to extreme. The Forest Service issued restrictions on the 4th of July. No campfires, no fireworks, no chainsaws before 10 a.m. when the dew was still on the ground. Tom had lived through 5 major wildfires in Paradise Valley. He knew what came next, the waiting, the watching, the smell of distant smoke that could be 50 miles away or 5. He cleared brush from around the house and barn, same as he did every summer, cut the grass short near the buildings, tested the well pump that fed the sprinkler system on the roof. Laura packed emergency bags, documents, photos, medications, and put them by the front door where they could grab them fast. The wolf watched him work. Tom saw it every day now, sometimes in the morning near the creek, sometimes at dusk on the eastern ridge. Once, at noon, sitting in the shade of a massive ponderosa pine while Tom dragged Deadfall away from the barn. The animal made no attempt to hide anymore, just observed, like it was studying him. On July 22nd, Laura saw it too. She was hanging laundry when Tom heard her call his name, not frightened, just insistent. He came around the barn to find her standing motionless, clothespin in hand, staring at the tree line. The wolf sat at the edge of the cottonwoods 40 yards away, watching. "How long has this been going on?" Laura's voice was steady, but Tom heard the tremor underneath. "Since May. Every day. Most days." The wolf shifted its weight, favoring the injured leg. Laura lowered the clothespin slowly, her movements careful, instinctive, prey behavior in the presence of predators. But the wolf didn't react, just sat there with those sage-colored eyes fixed on them. "Tom," Laura said quietly, "that thing is following you." "I know." "Why?" Tom had asked himself the same question 100 times, had run through every explanation he could think of: territorial behavior, curiosity, conditioning from the rescue. None of them fit the pattern. Wild wolves didn't act like this. They avoided humans, they hunted at distance, they didn't return to the place where they'd nearly died and sit in full view, day after day, watching. "I don't know," Tom said. The wolf stood, turned, limped back into the trees. Laura finished hanging the laundry in silence. When she came inside, she found Tom at the kitchen table with coffee and the Montana Wolf Management Plan open in front of him, a document he'd helped write 5 years ago, advocating for aggressive predator control in livestock areas. "Looking for answers?" Laura asked. "Looking for anything that explains this." His heart hammered with a truth his mind couldn't accept. This wasn't random behavior, this was intention. On August 13th, dry lightning moved across Paradise Valley at 3 in the morning. Tom woke to thunder that rattled the windows and light that turned the bedroom blue-white. He went to the window and watched the storm cell move east toward the mountains, lightning striking the ridgelines like artillery. No rain. Just electricity and wind. Laura appeared beside him. "How many strikes?" 20, maybe 30. "We'll know by morning." They knew by dawn. Smoke on Copper Ridge, 8 miles northeast, then smoke on Blacktail Mountain, 12 miles due east. By noon, the Forest Service had confirmed 4 separate ignitions from the previous night's storm. By evening, 2 of them had merged into a complex that was eating through timber at a rate the incident commander called unprecedented. The evacuation warnings came on August 14th, voluntary for Paradise Valley, mandatory for areas within 5 miles of the fire line. Tom wasn't in the mandatory zone yet, but the wind was shifting northwest, straight toward his ranch. He spent the 15th loading cattle into trailers, moving them to his brother's property 40 miles west, made 3 trips, Laura driving 1 truck, Tom driving the other. By evening, most of the herd was safe, but there was equipment still in the barn, expensive equipment, a new tractor, tools, generator, welding rig, things he'd need when he came back after the fire passed, if he came back. That night, Tom stood on his porch and watched the glow on the eastern horizon, orange and red, painting the bottom of the smoke column that rose 10,000 feet into the air. The wind carried ash that settled on his truck like grey snow. Laura came out with 2 beers, handed him one. They didn't speak for a long time. "We should leave tomorrow," she finally said. "I know. But you're not going to?" Tom took a long drink. "Need to move the equipment first, get what I can out of the barn." Tom felt both protected and haunted, like something was watching over him that he couldn't name. From the tree line, a wolf howled, long and low and mournful. Tom's hands started shaking. August 15th dawned red. Not the soft pink of normal sunrise, but the deep crimson that comes when smoke filters sunlight into something alien and wrong. Tom was up before dawn, loading his flatbed trailer with equipment from the barn, generator first, then the welder, then toolboxes that had belonged to his father and grandfather. Laura brought him coffee at 6 a.m. Fire jumped the containment line overnight. It's 15,000 acres now. Tom didn't stop loading. How far? 10 miles, maybe less. She set the coffee on the trailer bed. Hey, Tom, we need to go. 2 more loads, that's all I need. We don't have time for 2 more loads. Tom straightened, his back screaming from lifting. The air tasted like ash and distant smoke, that particular flavor of burning pine and sage that meant wildfire, not campfire. He'd tasted it before, in 2003, when the Copper Ridge fire took 8,000 acres, in 2012, when the Blacktail complex burned for 46 days straight. 1 load then, he said. The tractor. I can't leave the tractor. Laura nodded. She understood. That tractor represented $40,000 and 3 years of payments. You didn't walk away from that if you had a choice. I'll get the truck ready, but Tom, 1 load, then we leave. She went back to the house. Tom finished securing the current load, then drove the flatbed to his brother's place, 30 miles west, where the air was still clear and the sky was still blue. Made the drive in 40 minutes, unloaded in 20, drove back with his foot heavy on the accelerator. The smoke had thickened. By the time Tom reached his valley, visibility was down to maybe 200 yards. The sun was a dim orange coin in the grey sky. He could hear helicopters somewhere above the smoke layer, the heavy thump of rotors that meant water drops and fire suppression. But fire moves faster than helicopters can fly. Tom backed the flatbed up to the barn and opened the wide doors. The tractor sat in the center bay, red paint dull by years of use but engine sound as the day he'd bought it. He climbed into the cab, turned the key. The diesel engine coughed once, then caught. That's when he heard the roar, not thunder, not helicopters, fire making its own weather, superheated air rising so fast it created wind that sounded like freight trains. Tom had heard that sound once before, in 2012, right before the fire crowned and jumped a half-mile in 10 minutes. He looked east through the barn door. The smoke was orange now, not grey. The wind was shifting, swirling, bringing the smell of burning timber so strong it made his eyes water. Tom killed the tractor engine, jumped down, ran to the barn door. The ridgeline was burning. Not the ridgeline 10 miles away, the ridgeline half a mile behind his property where ponderosa pines had stood for 100 years. They were torches, now entire trees consumed in seconds. As Tom watched, the fire crowned, jumped from treetop to treetop like something alive and hunting. His hands started shaking, not from fear, from the sudden understanding that he'd waited too long. He ran for his truck. Laura was already in the passenger seat, white-knuckled and ready. Tom threw the truck in gear, started down the driveway, made it 50 yards before he realized he'd left his wallet in the barn, his father's pocket watch, the photo album Laura's mother had made before she died. "I have to go back," Tom said. "No." Laura's voice was steel. "Drive! Laura, my father's—" "Drive, Tom!" He stopped the truck, put it in park, looked at his wife. "I need 2 minutes." "You don't have 2 minutes." Tom opened the door. Laura grabbed his arm. "Please don't do this." "I'll be fast." He ran back to the barn. The air was hot now, the kind of heat that comes before fire, radiant warmth as that feels like standing too close to an oven. Tom ducked inside, grabbed his wallet from the workbench, the watch from where it hung on a nail, the photo album from the shelf. Turned to leave and saw fire on the western edge of the property. Not the east, the west. The fire had curved around, pushed by wind he hadn't anticipated. The driveway was cut off. Tom ran to the barn door, smoke everywhere now, thick enough to blur the world into orange twilight. He couldn't see the truck, couldn't see the house, couldn't see anything beyond 20 feet. He pulled his shirt over his mouth and ran toward where the truck should be. Made it 10 yards before the smoke overtook his lungs. He collapsed to his knees, coughing, his chest burning, couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't think beyond the animal panic of suffocation. This is how it ends, Tom thought. In smoke, like my father ended in water. He crawled back toward the barn, the only structure still visible. Made it through the door, collapsed inside. Everything went dark. Tom woke to something dragging him by his jacket collar. His first thought was Laura, that she'd come back for him, that she'd found him somehow in the smoke. But when he forced his eyes open, all he saw was grey. Grey air, grey light, grey world. His lungs felt like broken glass. Each breath was a conscious decision between pain and suffocation. The dragging stopped. Tom rolled onto his side, coughing so hard he thought his ribs would crack. When his vision cleared enough to see, he found himself 10 feet from where he'd collapsed. There were drag marks in the dirt floor of the barn, deep gouges like something heavy had been pulled. He tried to stand, made it to his knees before his legs gave out. The smoke was thicker now, layered like water, clearer near the ground, impenetrable above waist height. Tom crawled toward the barn door on his hands and knees. Made it halfway before the heat hit him like a physical wall. The barn was surrounded. Through gaps in the smoke, Tom saw orange light, fire in the tree line, fire in the grass, fire eating through fence posts and climbing the sides of his storage shed. The roar was constant now, punctuated by sharp cracks when trees exploded from internal pressure. Tom backed away from the door. His mind was working in fragments, shock and oxygen deprivation, making coherent thought nearly impossible. He needed water, needed air, needed to get low where the smoke was thinnest. He crawled to the center of the barn, pressed himself flat against the dirt. His father's watch was still clutched in his right hand. He opened his fist, looked at it. The brass case, tarnished but intact. The face cracked, but still ticking. His father had worn this watch the day he drowned. Tom's mother had pulled it from his father's pocket at the funeral home. Time stops, but watches keep running. Tom's mind screamed that this couldn't be how it ended. Not like this. Not now. He thought about Laura in the truck, watching smoke consume the barn. Thought about his brother getting the phone call. Thought about the ranch that had been in his family for 3 generations, burning while he lay on the dirt floor with his father's watch, and no way out. The smoke thickened. Tom pulled his shirt over his face, but it didn't help. He was drowning in air, just like his father had drowned in water. The Brewster men, Tom thought with the strange clarity that comes before death. We all go the same way. We all drown. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, grey closing in from the edges. He tried to take another breath and couldn't. His chest wouldn't expand, wouldn't cooperate. His body was shutting down, system by system, the way bodies do when oxygen stops reaching the brain. Tom closed his eyes, thought of Laura's face, the way she smiled when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she grabbed his arm in the truck and said, "Please, don't do this," and how he'd done it anyway because he couldn't leave his father's watch to burn. He'd made the wrong choice, the last choice, and now Laura would bury him. Something nudged his shoulder. Tom ignored it. Hallucination, his brain dying in creative ways. He'd read about that, how people see things in their final moments. Angels, deceased relatives, bright lights. Apparently Tom got shoulder nudges. The nudge came again, harder this time, insistent. Tom opened his eyes. A wolf stood over him in the smoke. Grey coat, darker points on ears and muzzle. 85 pounds. Right hind leg held slightly off-center, scarred from wire damage. Sage-coloured eyes looking directly into his. Everything inside Tom screamed impossible. The wolf grabbed Tom's jacket collar in its jaws, the same way it had grabbed him before, the way that had left the drag marks. It pulled. Tom's body slid 6 inches through the dirt. The wolf released, circled back, grabbed his boot, pulled again. Tom's brain couldn't process what was happening, couldn't reconcile the wolf with the fire, the rescue with the reality. This was shock, oxygen deprivation, his mind creating salvation because it couldn't accept ending. But the teeth on his boot were real. The pulling was real. The wolf's breathing, fast and labored in the smoke, was real. Tom tried to move. His arms responded sluggishly, his legs barely at all. The wolf grabbed his collar again, pulled. Tom pushed with his arms, trying to help. The wolf dragged him another 3 feet, toward the back of the barn. Not toward the door, toward the back. Tom's vision was going dark again, grey turning to black at the edges. He was dying. The wolf was dying. They were both dying in this barn together. And Tom's last coherent thought was that at least he wasn't alone. The wolf kept pulling. The wolf dragged Tom through the back wall of the barn. Not through a door. Tom's barn didn't have a back door. Through a gap in the boards that Tom had never noticed, never knew existed. A space maybe 18 inches wide where rot or age or simple neglect had created an opening between wall and foundation. The wolf pulled Tom's upper body through first, then released and grabbed his boot, pulling his legs. They emerged into slightly clearer air. Not clean, nothing was clean now, but breathable. Tom gasped, coughed, gasped again. His lungs screamed but functioned. Oxygen reached his brain. The grey tunnel in his vision expanded back toward normal. The wolf stood over him, panting, sides heaving. Its fur was singed along the back and flanks. Tom could smell burning hair mixed with smoke. The wolf's eyes were streaming, same as his, but it was alert, watching, waiting for Tom to move. Tom pushed himself up on his elbows. They were on the north side of the barn, where a narrow corridor existed between the building and the fence line. The fire was behind them, east and west, but this strip of land, maybe 30 feet wide, was untouched. The fence posts were burning at both ends of the corridor, but the center held. For now, the wolf moved, not away, not toward the fire. Along the fence line, heading north, it walked 20 feet, stopped, looked back at Tom. "I can't," Tom said aloud. His voice was raw, broken. "I can't stand up." The wolf returned, grabbed his collar again, pulled. Tom crawled, hands and knees through dirt and ash, following a wolf through a corridor of land that shouldn't exist. The fire roared on both sides, so close Tom could feel the heat through his jacket, so loud it drowned out everything except his heartbeat and the wolf's labored breathing. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Tom's world narrowed to the wolf's hindquarters ahead of him, the scarred right leg moving in its distinctive pattern. Pull forward, drag, pull forward, drag. A rhythm Tom matched with his own crawling. His hands bled, his knees bled, his lungs felt like someone had scraped them raw with steel wool. The wolf stopped. Tom looked up. They'd reached the end of the fence line where his property met Forest Service land. Beyond was a gap in the flames, a natural fire break where Blacktail Creek cut through the landscape, creating a corridor of water and stone and wet earth that fire couldn't cross easily. The creek.
The same creek where Tom had pulled the wolf from ice 7 months ago. The wolf looked at him, made a sound, not a growl, not a bark, something between the two. Then it stepped forward, grabbed Tom's boot one more time, and pulled him down the embankment toward water. They reached the creek bank. Tom half crawled, half rolled into the shallow water at the edge. It was cold, shockingly cold after the heat of the fire. Tom submerged his head, his arms, his chest. Drank until he thought he'd be sick. Came up gasping. The wolf stood on the bank, watching. Steam rose from its singed fur. Its sides heaved with each breath. But it didn't enter the water, just stood there, looking at Tom with those sage-colored eyes. Tom's entire worldview shattered in that moment. Everything he'd believed about animals, about wolves, about the separation between human intelligence and wild instinct, gone. "You came back," Tom said, his voice cracked. "You came into fire. For me." The wolf's ears came forward. "You knew?" Tom was crying now, tears mixing with creek water and ash on his face. "You knew I was there. You knew the path out. You—" He couldn't finish, couldn't articulate what he was witnessing. The wolf had tracked him, had found him unconscious in a burning barn, had dragged him through a gap Tom hadn't known existed, along a corridor the fire hadn't yet touched, to the one place on his property where water provided safety. Wolves don't do that. Wolves don't reason like that. Wolves don't risk their lives for humans. But this one had. Tom heard helicopters overhead, the deep thump of rotors getting closer. The wolf heard them too, its head lifted, ears swiveling toward the sound. Then it looked at Tom one final time. In that look, Tom saw everything: recognition, decision, completion, the debt paid, the circle closed. Whatever had begun that January morning in the frozen creek, it ended here, in the same water, with both of them alive because of each other. The wolf turned and limped into the smoke. "Wait!" Tom tried to stand, fell back into the creek. "Wait, please!" But the wolf was gone, vanished into the grey-orange haze like it had never existed. Tom sat in the creek and sobbed, not from fear, not from relief, from awe. Tom doesn't know how long he sat in Blacktail Creek before the helicopter found him. Minutes, hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. He was aware of water flowing around him, of ash falling like snow, of fire on both sides of the creek, held back by water and stone and whatever luck or grace
Kept him breathing. He was aware of his father's watch, still clutched in his hand, still ticking. The helicopter came in low, rotors whipping the smoke into spirals. Tom heard voices on loudspeakers but couldn't process the words. Two figures in yellow fire gear rappelled down, splashed into the creek beside him, hands on his shoulders, questions he couldn't answer. "Can you stand, sir? Can you hear me? Are you injured?" Tom looked up at the firefighter, young man, maybe 25, face blackened with soot. "The wolf," Tom said. "What?" "The wolf, did you see it?" The firefighter exchanged glances with his partner. "Sir, we need to get you in the basket. Can you stand?" They lifted him, strapped him into a rescue litter. The ascent was a blur of rotor wash and smoke and sky. Tom closed his eyes and saw sage-colored eyes looking back, heard the sound of teeth on his boot collar, felt the wolf's breath as it dragged him through smoke and fire. At the top, hands pulled him into the helicopter. Someone put an oxygen mask over his face. The world tilted as the helicopter banked away from the fire. Through the open door, Tom saw his ranch burning. The barn was gone. The house was gone, everything he owned reduced to ash and foundation. But he was alive. Because a wolf, the same wolf he'd saved from drowning 7 months ago, had come back, had found him, had led him out through a path that shouldn't have existed. Tom started laughing or crying, he couldn't tell which. The paramedic leaned close, checking his pupils with a flashlight, asking questions about pain and confusion and whether he knew what day it was. Tom knew what day it was. August 15th, the day a wolf repaid a debt that wolves aren't supposed to understand they owe. They took Tom to the hospital in Livingston. Smoke inhalation, dehydration, second-degree burns on his hands and knees, and what the doctors carefully termed possible traumatic stress response. Laura was there when he woke, her face swollen from crying. "I thought you were dead," she said, gripping his hand hard enough to hurt. "I watched the barn burn. I thought—" "The wolf," Tom interrupted. "Did they find the wolf?" Laura went very still. "Tom, there was no wolf. It pulled me out. Through the back of the barn, along the fence line to the creek. The firefighters said you were alone when they found you. Because it left. But it was there, Laura. It saved me." She looked at the doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a clinical expression. The doctor stepped forward. "Mr. Brewster, you experienced severe smoke inhalation. Oxygen deprivation can cause vivid hallucinations, especially combined with extreme stress. What you remember may not be—" "I know what I saw." Tom tried to sit up. Pain flared across his chest. "My jacket. Where's my jacket?" They brought it to him. The canvas work jacket he'd been wearing, now stiff with smoke residue and creek water. Tom turned it over. The collar was torn, not burned, torn. 4 clear puncture marks where teeth had gripped fabric. "Look at this," Tom said, holding it up. "Wolf bite. This is where it pulled me." The doctor examined the tears. "Mr. Brewster, this could have happened when you crawled through debris. The barn was collapsing. Check for saliva. Test the tears. You'll find wolf DNA. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. If you also believe in the extraordinary, subscribe to the channel. Real stories are told here." The fire marshal came 2 days later. Name was Rodriguez, 20 years with the Forest Service, a man who'd investigated 50 major wildfires. He sat beside Tom's hospital bed with a tablet and a confused expression. "Mr. Brewster, I need you to walk me through what happened," Tom told him. All of it. The wolf in January, the tracks in May, the watching all summer, the rescue in the fire. Rodriguez took notes without comment until Tom finished. "The barn's completely destroyed," Rodriguez said. "But I found something interesting. There's a gap in the north wall. Weathered boards, maybe 18 inches wide. You could fit through it if you were crawling." "I didn't know it was there." "Neither would most people. It's hidden behind a vertical support beam from the inside." Rodriguez swiped through photos on his tablet. "But here's what I can't explain. There's a corridor along your north fence line. 30 feet wide, runs from the barn to Blacktail Creek. The fire burned right up to it on both sides, but didn't cross. Like something created a fire break. The wolf led me through there." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Brewster, the wind patterns that day were chaotic. Fire was jumping in unpredictable ways. That corridor staying clear, it could be pure chance. Microclimate conditions we don't fully understand." "But you don't believe that?" "I believe in evidence." Rodriguez showed him another photo. "We found tracks, canid, larger than coyote, leading from the barn along the fence line to the creek, recent enough that ash hadn't fully covered them. And we found this." He swiped to the final image. Tom's jacket collar close up, the puncture marks clearly visible. "Lab confirmed wolf saliva," Rodriguez said quietly. "On your jacket and your right boot. Fresh. Deposited within hours of the fire." Tom felt his throat close. "So you believe me?" "I believe something happened that I can't explain." Rodriguez closed the tablet. "Off the record?" I've fought wildfires for 20 years. I've seen people do impossible things, run through flames, lift burning logs, carry victims through smoke. Survival instinct makes us superhuman sometimes. He paused. I've never seen an animal do it. Never seen one come back to danger for a human. But the evidence says that's what happened. Tom's entire understanding of the natural world collapsed and rebuilt itself in that moment. Tom came home 3 days later to a ranch that no longer existed. The barn was a black skeleton. The house was foundation and chimney. The tractor he'd tried to save was melted metal in the shape of something that used to be useful. Everything his grandfather had built, everything his father had maintained, everything Tom had spent 38 years working, gone. But he was alive. Laura drove him up the driveway in silence. They sat in the truck for a long time, engine running, looking at the destruction. Finally, Tom opened the door. I need to see the creek. They walked together across charred earth that crunched under their boots. The fence line was gone. The cottonwoods were blackened spires, but the creek still ran clear and cold, indifferent to fire, same as it had been indifferent to ice 7 months ago. Tom knelt at the water's edge, put his hand in. The current pulled at his fingers, trying to carry them downstream the way current had tried to carry his father, the way it had tried to carry the wolf. Right here, Tom said. This is where it led me. Laura knelt beside him. Do you think it survived? I don't know. Will it come back? Tom looked at the tree line, what remained of it. Burned trunks and ash and silence. No, I think it did what it came to do. Laura took his hand. The fire marshal called this morning. He wants to include your account in the official report. Said it's important to document unusual animal behavior during wildfires. What did you tell him? That you'd cooperate. She squeezed his hand. Tom, people are going to think you're crazy. They already do. This will make it worse. Tom stood, Laura rising with him. I know what happened. I know what that wolf did. And if people think I'm crazy because I'm telling the truth, then they can think what they want. 3 weeks later, the story made it to the Livingston paper first, then the Bozeman Chronicle, then a wildlife blog that specialized in unusual animal behavior. By September, Tom had given 6 interviews and turned down 20 more. Half the people who called wanted to hear about the miracle. The other half wanted to explain why he was wrong. Oxygen deprivation, trauma response, coincidental wind patterns, anything but a wolf making a conscious decision to save a human life. At the Stockmen's Association meeting, Jim McKenzie stood up during open comments. We all know what happened to Tom Brewster was a tragedy, but using it to push some agenda about wolves being noble creatures, that's dangerous. That's going to get someone killed. Dale Richards nodded. Wolves are predators. They kill livestock. They're not Disney animals that understand debt and gratitude. Tom sat in the back row and said nothing. He'd learned you can't argue with people whose minds are made up. You can only tell your story and let them decide what to believe. After the meeting, Doc Morrison found him in the parking lot. How's the arm? Tom flexed his hand. Better. Still get shooting pain sometimes. From the creek, not the fire. From both, maybe. Tom looked at the old doctor. You think I'm crazy too? Morrison smiled. I think you experienced something extraordinary. And I think people are uncomfortable with extraordinary things because they challenge how we understand the world. He clapped Tom on the shoulder. My grandfather's coyote story, I think it was true, and I think your wolf story is true. Whether anyone else believes it doesn't matter. Tom rebuilt, not the ranch, the insurance barely covered the loss, and at 58, he didn't have another 30 years to start over. He sold the land to a conservation trust that promised to keep it wild, moved with Laura into town into a small house with a view of the mountains. But he kept certain things. The jacket with the torn collar hangs in his closet. He's never washed it. The wolf saliva has long since degraded, but the tears remain. 4 puncture marks where teeth gripped fabric and pulled a dying man toward water. His father's watch sits on his dresser, still ticking, still keeping time through drowning and fire and impossible rescues. And photographs, the fire marshal's documentation, the tracks along the fence line, the corridor that stayed clear when everything around it burned, the lab report confirming wolf DNA. Have you witnessed something like this? If you believe in a special connection with animals, write, "They remember kindness" in the comments. Share your own experience with animal wisdom below. Tom shows these things to people who ask, not to convince them. He's learned you can't convince someone who doesn't want to believe, but to document, to preserve, to say this happened, whether it makes sense or not. At night, sometimes Tom dreams about the wolf, about sage-colored eyes and teeth on his boot collar, about the moment in the barn when he was dying and something wild decided he shouldn't. In the dreams, he asks the wolf why. Why come back? Why risk fire for a human who'd spent 30 years killing your kind? The wolf never answers, just looks at him the way it looked at him twice, once through ice, once through smoke. With something that might be understanding, or might be something deeper, older, that humans don't have words for. I met Tom Brewster 6 weeks after the fire. He showed me the jacket, the photographs, the fire marshal's report. He told me the story in his quiet, measured way, a man who's spent his life with animals, who understands their behavior, who knows the difference between anthropomorphism and witnessed fact. "It doesn't happen," Tom said, turning the torn jacket over in his hands. "Wolves don't think like that, don't plan like that, don't remember debt." He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. But it did happen. I
felt its teeth on my boot. I followed it through fire. I sat in that creek and watched it leave, and I knew it had come back for me. This couldn't be, but he saw it. His mind refused to believe what his heart knew was true. Tom cried then, not from fear or trauma or gratitude, from awe, from the shattering recognition that the world is stranger and more beautiful than we allow ourselves to believe, that animals carry wisdom we barely understand, that a wolf can remember kindness 7 months later and risk everything to repay it. I left Tom's house with the image of those sage-colored eyes in my head, with the knowledge that somewhere in Montana's high country, a gray wolf with a scarred right leg is still hunting, still surviving, still carrying the memory of a man who pulled it from frozen water when he could have let it die. Nature keeps score of our kind deeds, and one day, maybe when we least expect it, maybe when we need it most, nature pays us back. Tom Brewster knows this now. He knows it in his bones, in his scars, in the way his hand still shakes when he talks about the moment that Wolf looked at him through smoke and decided to save his life. He knows because he lived it, because it happened, because sometimes in the space between impossible and true, miracles walk on 4 legs and remember everything.